The perpetually offended Liberals branded Chappelle transphobic for that joke, despite the comedian taking aim at a wide range of people during his set. And last week, a protest that garnered just 125 signatures, 125, was enough to bully the First Avenue Theatre in Minneapolis into cancelling the comics gig. In a grovelling and I actually think pathetic statement, they said to staff, artists in our community, we hear you and we are sorry. We know we must hold ourselves to the highest possible standards and we know we've let you down. But all is not lost, because there's a fight back taking place in the entertainment industry led by the former Mumford & Sons musician Winston Marshall. In March 2021, Winston felt the full force of cancel culture after he was hounded online for praising a book investigating Antifa, written by Andy No. But a sensational and rather inspiring move, he chose to quit one of the biggest bands in the world so that he could continue to speak about politics freely without harming his fellow bandmates. And I'm delighted to say Winston joins me for one of those unfiltered conversations now. Winston Marshall, great to have you here. I just wonder, is there a pushback happening in the entertainment industry? Because obviously we do have folk like you, Dave Chappelle, Ricky Gervais. You know, there are some high-profile examples of people who are fighting back. But the fact that this Minneapolis theatre cancelled the gig of one of the biggest comedians in the world because of 125 people on a petition, that really worries me.
Yeah, I was going to challenge that part of your introduction.
Oh, good. Go on.
I'm not sure it feels like that to me, that there's much of a pushback. But actually, well, for example, Dave Chappelle doesn't seem to care and he marches on. He was cancelled from First Avenue, the famous venue where Prince filmed Purple Rain. I've played there myself. In fact, he even has a plaque on the wall that they put up for him, Dave Chappelle, at First Avenue, and now they've kind of thrown him under the bus like this. But I actually think there is a bit of a pushback. Bill Burr's got a Netflix special at the moment, and it pretty much ridicules cancel culture throughout. We have top comedians like John Cleese ridiculing cancel culture.
Bill Maher, he's been great.
Exactly. And so in one sense, you feel like there is a pushback, but look at the ground and look what's actually happening. It's a little bit more worrying. On my interview show, I interviewed a really inspiring woman named Rosie Kay this week, who...
this is Marshall Matters, your podcast, which you can get via the Spectator platforms, right?
That's exactly right. And I'm interviewing people in the creative industries looking at freedom of expression. And she is British, and last year she was cancelled from, or she was forced to resign from her dance company, which was called the Rosie Kay Dance Company, which she'd been running for 17 years because she wanted to put on a production, or a dance production, of Virginia Woolf's Orlando, where the central protagonist, about halfway through the story, turns from a man into a woman. But this, when it was written, the idea of trans was just not, it couldn't possibly have been in Virginia Woolf's mind. Now, she was forced to resign, but she is showing real pluck and courage now, setting up a new company, wanting to put on this production now. And so there are stories of people who go through this hellish experience, and it is, for artists, quite hellish. I think politicians are probably used to getting flack and used to getting criticised, and it's by nature they're either loved or hated, or usually just hated. But musicians, artists aren't used to that experience. So for them, it's very traumatising.
And it's not part of the day job.
It's not part of the day job at all. It is part of the day job to challenge people. It is part of the day job to try and make them think. And so with Rosie and her production, she was intentional about choosing things which are going to make us think about these problems that we as a society are thinking about in different ways.
And I guess the examples that we've spoken about, you don't really have musicians, your peers speaking out. So we see it in comedy, and part of that is because, of course, in comedy, you have to get up, you have to perform a set, and so sometimes that material is going to be controversial. I guess if you're a musician, you don't necessarily have to express your views increasingly, and I know this as someone who used to interview a lot of musicians. Increasingly, musicians are choosing not to give interviews. I've spoken to people like Ed Sheeran about this, that they think soon musicians will just be too scared to give any interviews because they know that one line can be extrapolated and used on the internet to try and cancel them. So is your message to, I guess, your peers to speak up more, or can you understand why they're so terrified sometimes?
I don't think people really care, particularly when it comes to an election, about what actors and musicians think that they should vote for.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Having said that, short of telling people how to vote, discussing the issues, I think, is fine. They're parts of society just as much as anyone else.
Yeah, they don't want to be preached to, but I think when it comes to culture is absolutely set by celebrity. And if we're only hearing one set of arguments from celebrity, which tend to be, the very woke, the very liberal arguments, then that does help to set a culture.
Well, actually, a lot of these musicians, they will happily on stage talk politics at length sometimes, but those are progressive politics that usually aren't going to get them into trouble. So they might say F Trump or rally against Israel.
Or Roe v. Wade, for example.
Well, exactly, and those aren't issues that...
That's acceptable because it's what the MSM and the liberal elite believe.
Or even creative industries on whole are progressives. Even those getting cancelled now are progressives. Dave Chappelle's a progressive. I'm a liberal. Rosie Kay, again, she comes from the left. This world, it's not got conservatives, particularly in it. I mean, there are some conservatives, but generally not many.
But it's the type of issues, isn't it? It's social issues where if you go against the grain, you risk, and you prove it. This is the problem. You prove it. You risk cancellation. Obviously, you've turned that quote-unquote cancellation. I guess you could argue you cancelled yourself from Mumford & Sons. You chose to leave. But do we need more artists to be brave, to have the discussion, and then all of a sudden it doesn't become such a big deal?
I think the courage shown by people like Dave Chappelle, who plough on, OK, you're not going to have me on at this venue, I'll go down the road. That's the courage. And that's the example, and those are the role models we need.
Yeah, and also, by the way, I would praise Netflix too, because they went through a period where they lost a lot of subscribers, and a lot of people said it was because they were pushing a particular woke narrative. But it would have been very easy for Netflix to cancel Dave Chappelle too. There was that massive uprising from their employers, and they held firm. So I think we also need to see more corporations. For example, the publishing company behind J.K. Rowling. Now, you could argue they have huge financial motivation to support J.K. Rowling, but they did. And so, look, maybe I am too optimistic, maybe I am, but I hope that folk like you, like J.K. Rowling, like Dave Chappelle, like Ricky Gervais, I hope it does indicate there is some sort of shift in culture happening away from cancel culture. I may be naive, though. I accept that.
I think you're right that where before there was a big pushback of people, let's say, protesting the ideas or the wrong ideas, wrong thing. Now, major companies realise that if they cancel someone, they're going to have major pushback because actually... The silent majority, or a lot of people, are fed up with this attitude and this philosophy that's infiltrated so many institutions, and they will stand up. And if Netflix takes someone down, people will be like, you know what?
Exactly, because we just won't buy our Ben and Jerry's, we just won't subscribe to Disney+. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Exactly.
Winston Marshall, fascinating conversation. Thank you so much. And I am a huge fan of your Spectator podcast, Marshall Matters, which you should go and download now, but just make sure you don't listen until 11 o'clock tonight after my show. Winston Marshall, thank you so much.